Give us the money, old lady, or things will get ugly. The voice cut through the cold night air. Adam hadn't seen what was happening yet, but he already knew. It wasn't good. His pulse quickened as he turned the corner. 3 men. 1 frail old woman. One of them had her by the wrist, squeezing hard. Another was digging through her purse. The third stood back, watching like he was enjoying the show. Everything in Adam screamed to walk away. This wasn't his fight. But then the old woman looked at him, not with fear, not with desperation, with expectation, like she was waiting for him to do something. Let her go, he said coldly. The tallest thug smirked. Ow? And who the hell are you? Walk away. The smallest one laughed. Look at this guy. Thinks he's a hero. Adam knew this was stupid. 3 against 1. He wasn't trained, wasn't strong, wasn't fast enough. But it didn't matter. His body was already moving. He swung. His fist connected with the jaw of the man holding the woman. The crack of impact echoed down the alley. The thug staggered back, cursing. You middle. The others rushed him. A punch slammed into his ribs. His lungs locked up. Another hit sent his vision spinning. A fist smashed into his jaw, snapping his head sideways. He barely had time to react before a brutal blow to the stomach took him off his feet. Then he was on the ground. Boots crashed against his ribs, his arms, his back. Pain exploded everywhere. Laughter. Not so tough now, huh? Adam curled up, shielding his head, waiting for it to stop. Then finally silence. Footsteps. They were leaving. Next time, mind your business. The alley grew still. The pain in his body pulsed with every heartbeat. His lip was split. His ribs ached with every breath. Then a soft touch. A hand on his shoulder. You're a brave boy. The woman. She hadn't left. Adam forced his eyes open. She knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. Remember this, son. Kindness always comes back. Her voice was steady, certain. She reached out, gripping his arm. Come on. Adam winced as she helped him sit up. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body. The woman studied him, as if memorizing his face. What's your name? Adam, she muttered, wiping blood from his mouth. Where do you work, Adam? Restaurant. Kitchen. She nodded. Then she stood. Be careful out here, son. And just like that, she was gone. Adam sat there, watching her disappear into the darkness. The night pressed around him, the cold biting through his torn jacket. Every inch of his body screamed in agony. But the only thing echoing in his mind was her voice. Kindness always comes back. Every step hurt. The bruises from last night still pulsed beneath his skin, each one a reminder of his reckless decision. But he kept moving. The streets were empty, the wind pushing dead leaves along the pavement. By the time he reached his building, his fingers trembled as he fumbled with the keys. Inside, the air was stale and cold. His tiny room looked even smaller, the dim light barely reaching the cracked walls. He tossed his jacket over the back of a chair and collapsed onto the bed, not even bothering to take off his shoes. He closed his eyes. His head pounded. His ribs ached with every breath. But his thoughts refused to settle. The old woman, her calm voice. Remember this, son. Kindness always comes back. What did she mean? He had helped her, and in return, he got split lips, bruises, and a few days of misery. The kindness always came back. Why did his life feel like one endless punch to the gut? Sleep came in fragments. His body shut down, but his mind never stopped. Shadows moved in his dreams. Laughter, fists, the weight of boots on his ribs. He saw her again, standing over him, watching. Her gaze wasn't pitying. It was knowing. Morning came too soon. A dull, gray light seeped through the window. The ache in his ribs had settled into something deeper, sharper. He sat up slowly, rubbing his temples. His stomach growled, but the hunger was familiar. He could ignore it. He reached for his phone. One notification. Rent due, final notice. His stomach twisted. He already knew what it would say, but he opened it anyway. This is your final warning. If payment is not made within 48 hours, eviction proceedings will begin. He exhaled slowly. No money. No options. He swung his legs over the bed, planting his feet on the cold floor. What? That was the only thing keeping him afloat. He had to keep moving. By the time he got to the restaurant, the morning rush had already begun. The smell of grease and coffee clung to the air. He slipped in through the back, hoping to avoid his boss. Nolak, Adam. He barely had time to react before his manager was on him. Voice sharp, eyes full of frustration. What the hell happened to your face? Adam hesitated, then shrugged. Does it matter? The manager scowled. You were late again. I don't care. You screw up one more time, you're out. Adam bit his tongue and nodded. This job was miserable, but it was all he had. He tied his apron and got to work, scrubbing dishes, clearing tables, taking orders he couldn't care less about. The hours blurred together. His body ached, his ribs protested every movement, but he kept going. Until, hey, Adam. He turned. Jenna, one of the waitresses, stood near the counter, watching him with a curious expression. Some lady came in earlier, asked about you. Adam frowned. What lady? Older, classy, looked like she had money. His stomach tightened. Did she leave a name? Jenna shook her head. Just asked if you still worked here. Then she left. Adam felt something shift inside him. It was her. Every step hurt. The bruises from last night still pulsed beneath his skin, each one a reminder of his reckless decision. But he kept moving. The streets were empty, the wind pushing dead leaves along the pavement. By the time he reached his building, his fingers trembled as he fumbled with the keys. Inside, the air was stale and cold. His tiny room looked even smaller, the dim light barely reaching the cracked walls. He tossed his jacket over the back of a chair and collapsed onto the bed, not even bothering to take off his shoes. He closed his eyes. His head pounded. His ribs ached with every breath. But his thoughts refused to settle. The old woman, her calm voice. Remember this, son. Kindness always comes back. What did she mean? He had helped her, and in return, he got split lips, bruises, and a few days of misery. The kindness always came back. Why did his life feel like one endless punch to the gut? Sleep came in fragments. His body shut down, but his mind never stopped. Shadows moved in his dreams. Laughter, fists, the weight of boots on his ribs. He saw her again, standing over him, watching. Her gaze wasn't pitying. It was knowing. Morning came too soon. A dull, gray light seeped through the window. The ache in his ribs had settled into something deeper, sharper. He sat up slowly, rubbing his temples. His stomach growled, but the hunger was familiar. He could ignore it. He reached for his phone. One notification. Rent due, final notice. His stomach twisted. He already knew what it would say, but he opened it anyway. This is your final warning. If payment is not made within 48 hours, eviction proceedings will begin. He exhaled slowly. No money. No options. He swung his legs over the bed, planting his feet on the cold floor. What? That was the only thing keeping him afloat. He had to keep moving. By the time he got to the restaurant, the morning rush had already begun. The smell of grease and coffee clung to the air. He slipped in through the back, hoping to avoid his boss. Nolak, Adam. He barely had time to react before his manager was on him, voice sharp, eyes full of frustration. What the hell happened to your face? Adam hesitated, then shrugged. Does it matter? The manager scowled. You were late again. I don't care. You screw up one more time, you're out. Adam bit his tongue and nodded. This job was miserable, but it was all he had. He tied his apron and got to work, scrubbing dishes, clearing tables, taking orders he couldn't care less about. The hours blurred together. His body ached, his ribs protested every movement, but he kept going. Until, hey, Adam. He turned. Jenna, one of the waitresses, stood near the counter, watching him with a curious expression. Some lady came in earlier, asked about you. Adam frowned. What lady? Older, classy, looked like she had money. His stomach tightened. Did she leave a name? Jenna shook her head. Just asked if you still worked here. Then she left. Adam felt something shift inside him. It was her. Why was she looking for him? And what the hell did she want? The luxurious mansion was silent, but inside, Mrs. Gray felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. You have serious heart problems, Mrs. Gray. You need to take care of yourself. She had heard it before, But this time it felt final. When the doctor left, she remained seated, staring at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. The room felt colder than usual, the chandeliers casting dim shadows across the walls. She was alone, truly alone. Then the phone rang. She already knew who it was before she even picked up. "Mom, we need to talk about some financial matters." Her son's voice was smooth, controlled. The same voice he used every time money was involved. Mrs. Gray exhaled slowly. "You're talking about the inheritance again, aren't you?" A brief silence. "Mom, it's just that. It would be good to have everything organized properly. I'm still alive, of course, but you know how these things work. It's best to plan ahead." Mrs. Gray closed her eyes. That was all they cared about. Not her health, not her well-being, just her money. "I'll handle my own affairs, thank you," she said, her voice colder than before. Her son hesitated. Then a sigh. "Fina, we'll talk later." The line went dead. She set the phone down gently, but inside, she was seething. Her own family was circling her like vultures, waiting for her to die so they could pick apart what was left. That night she barely slept. The silence of the mansion felt suffocating. The same walls, the same empty halls. Everything that once felt like home now felt like a prison. Her mind drifted to that night. The alley. The darkness. The moment she was grabbed. And then him. Adam. A stranger. A nobody. Yet he was the only one who had stepped in. The only one who had fought for her, expecting nothing in return. She remembered the way he had looked up at her, beaten and bruised, but still standing. That was real. That was something she hadn't seen in a long time. The next morning she made a call. "I want to change my will." The lawyer paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "To whom?" "A boy. Adam." There was silence on the other end. "Does your family know about this?" "Yeah. And they won't." She could practically hear the hesitation in his voice. "Mrs. Gray, this is a big decision. Are you certain? Just do it." She hung up. She had made up her mind. They didn't deserve it. They never had. And Adam? He had no idea what was coming. Adam had no idea his life was about to change. For the past few weeks, he had been searching desperately for a second job. Every morning, he left his tiny apartment and walked the streets, stopping at every cafe, grocery store, and warehouse that might have an opening. He filled out applications, answered the same repetitive questions, and nodded whenever managers told him what he already expected to hear. "We're not hiring right now. We'll keep your application on file. We're looking for someone with more experience." The cycle repeated itself every day. He had knocked on every possible door, yet none of them opened. His savings had dried up. Rent was overdue. The eviction notice sat on his small table, a silent reminder that his time was running out. Each passing day felt heavier than the last, suffocating him under the weight of failure. He couldn't remember the last time he had a proper meal. He was down to his last few dollars, barely enough to buy instant noodles or stale bread. His stomach twisted with hunger, but there was nothing he could do. His last hope was holding on to his current job at the restaurant. It was grueling work, washing dishes for hours, scrubbing grease off pans, and enduring the never-ending complaints from customers. The pay was terrible, but at least it was something. If he lost that job, there was no backup plan. Then, things got even worse. "Adam, we need to talk." His boss's voice was flat, businesslike, with none of the usual impatience or irritation. That was a bad sign. Adam wiped his hands on his apron and stepped out of the kitchen, already sensing that this wasn't going to end well. "What's going on?" The owner, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, folded his arms across his chest, his face unreadable. "We're letting you go." The words landed like a punch to the gut. "What? Why?" "Security cameras caught someone snooping around the register last night. Looked a lot like you." Adam's blood ran cold. "That's insane. It wasn't me." "Doesn't matter," his boss said with a shrug. "I don't have time for problems. You're done here. You can't fire me for something I didn't do." "I can and I am." And just like that, it was over. Adam stood outside the restaurant, staring blankly at the busy street. Fired. No job. No money. Rent overdue. Everything was crumbling. His mind felt foggy, overwhelmed by the reality of his situation. He thought about pleading with his boss, trying to reason with him, but he knew it was pointless. He was replaceable. No one cared about his problems. The city didn't stop for people like him. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at the screen. There was no one to call, no family to turn to, no friends who could lend him money. He was completely alone. Then Jenna, his former coworker, stepped outside. "Hey, some guy came in today. Asked about you." Adam Fronet, too. Didn't say much. Just left this. She handed him a business card. Richard Faulkner, estate attorney. Adam turned it over. "Call me." His gut twisted. He didn't know why, but something about this didn't feel random. "What did he look like?" he asked. "Older guy. Well-dressed. Definitely not from around here." Adam stared at the card. He had never met an estate attorney before. Why would someone like that be looking for him? He hesitated for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and dialed the number. The line rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "Mr. Carter, I was expecting your call." "Adam Sadaloit. Who are you? And why are you looking for me?" "My name is Richard Faulkner. I'm an estate attorney. I represent Eleanor Gray." Adam's heart skipped a beat. "Mrs. Gray? What about her?" There was a pause on the other end. "She passed away recently. And in her will, she left everything to you." Silence. What? "Her house. Her bank accounts. The family estate. It's all yours." Adam gripped the phone tighter. "There has to be a mistake." "There is no mistake, Mr. Carter. I have all the legal documents. When can you come to my office?" Adam's head was spinning. I don't understand. Why would she do this?" That's something only she could have answered. Adam stood frozen, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. This had to be a mistake. It had to be. His hands trembled as he ended the call. He needed to sit down, to process what had just happened, but there was nowhere to go. The street felt too loud, too bright, too overwhelming. Eleanor Gray had left him everything. A woman he barely knew. Why? The note she had left him days ago suddenly made more sense. "Live honestly. Soon you will understand everything." Was this what she meant? That she had planned this all along? His chest tightened as the weight of it sank in. He had nothing yesterday, and now he had everything. But somehow it still felt like he was lost. Adam was on his way to the mansion, still struggling to believe what had happened. Just days ago he was barely surviving, washing dishes for minimum wage, not knowing if he would have a place to sleep next month. And now he was in a taxi, heading toward an estate that legally belonged to him. Felt absurd. Unreal. The drive was long, passing through empty roads lined with towering trees. As the taxi turned onto the private driveway, Adam's breath caught. The mansion stood ahead, massive and imposing, its stone facade washed in the golden light of the setting sun. The taxi driver glanced at him through the mirror. "You sure about this place, man?" Adam hesitated. "Yeah, I think so." The iron gates opened as they approached, as if they had been waiting for him. The car rolled up to the front entrance, stopping in front of grand wooden doors. Adam stepped out, his heartbeat heavy in his chest. The door was slightly ajar. Someone had been expecting him. As he pushed it open and stepped inside, he was met with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of perfume, a distant reminder of Mrs. Gray. The marble floor reflected the warm glow from the chandelier above. Sunlight filtered through the towering windows, casting long shadows. But something felt off. Presence. He wasn't alone. Across the room, standing near the grand staircase, was a man, mid-40s, expensive suit, sharp features. His posture was rigid, arms crossed, eyes cold. Adam didn't need an introduction. He already knew who this was. Mrs. Gray's son. The man exhaled slowly, looking Adam up and down, his expression unreadable. "So you're the one," he said. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it. "Adam Sadaloit, I didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did we," the man replied, his jaw tightening. "But here we are." Silence stretched between them. Adam could feel the weight of resentment in the air, and he understood it. This was supposed to be his home, his inheritance. Instead, it had been given to a stranger. "She left me a letter," Adam said finally. "Maybe it'll explain why she did this." The The man gave a bitter smile. She always did love her secrets. Adam stepped toward the large study where he had been told the letter was waiting. The son didn't move, just watched him go. Inside the study, the air was still, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. The grand desk stood in the center, and on it a single envelope. His name was written in precise, elegant handwriting. With slightly trembling fingers, Adam picked it up and opened it. Adam, by now you've arrived. I trust you're confused, maybe even angry, but know this choice was made with purpose. You never saw yourself as someone who could change their life, but I did. The night you stood up for me, I saw something rare, not just kindness but courage, integrity, strength. I had spent my life surrounded by people who only took, and then I met someone who gave even when he had nothing. This house, this wealth, it has never been what truly matters. It is the choices we make that define us. And now the choice is yours. Eleanor Gray. Adam let out a slow breath. He reread the words, once, twice, letting them settle. She had seen something in him that he had never seen in himself. But as he stood there, in a house that was never meant to be his, he realized something. This wasn't his home, and never would be. He turned back to the doorway, where Mrs. Gray's son still stood, watching him carefully. I don't want the house, Adam said. The man's expression flickered. What? I never wanted this. I'm not here to take your home away from you. I have enough now to change my life, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have. The tension in the room shifted. For the first time, the man's rigid stance eased slightly. You're serious? He asked. Adam nodded. It belongs to your family. Keep it. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, the man exhaled, some of the hardness leaving his expression. She must have seen something in you, he said. Something the rest of us never did. Adam gave a small smile. She saw more in me than I ever did. For the first time, Mrs. Gray's son extended a hand. Adam shook it. There was no resentment in his grip, only quiet understanding. As Adam stepped outside, the air felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for days had lifted. This was not the end. It was the beginning. He had been given a chance, a real one, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what to do with it. Kindness always comes back. Now it was his turn to decide what came next.